So hello everyone, and actually my presentation will be a little bit about different topic. It's about IT and the role of technology in rebuilding Ukraine. Ukraine is always known as a grain basket or the mining country or country of agriculture, but it's also the brain basket because actually Ukraine has a very developed IT sector, very developed technology sector, and it also is very important in rebuilding Ukraine in the future. But let me take you please to a journey before 24th February and after 24th February. So about IT in Ukraine. IT is actually the second biggest export driver in Ukraine. And it was before the war, and it was somewhere second, third between the agriculture and the mining industry. IT is 4% of Ukrainian GDP, and it brings approximately 7 billion of income to Ukrainian budget and families, and it is said that actually one IT specialist creates also 3 to 4 jobs around IT, which means it has a really big impact on economy of Ukraine. And besides being an IT country, because we have 320,000 IT specialists, second to Poland in Europe, it's also the capital of, let's say, space. You know, you remember the space in Soviet times, probably. Everyone in 60s, 70s were watching the launches, later a little bit more, but less, but still very many space shuttles were actually made in Ukraine and in my favorite city of Dnipro. And we hope the private space will also be born based on this old heritage and legacy, let's say, of the science and technology. So Ukraine is very much IT country. And for example, in Kharkiv is unfortunately news because of the different topics and because of the war these days, but only in Kharkiv, it's 1 million people city, a little bit more. There is almost 70 universities, and out of 70 universities, 13 have different faculties in regards to IT, technology. So technology is like basically one of the cornerstones of Ukraine. And this is an example of basically SpaceX competitor, Firefly, which has a research and development center in Dnipro, and it's approximately even 1,000 people that are working in Ukraine, developing really, let's say, rockets which are launched from US, and first test launches were successful, and now Ukrainian US rockets will be launched by private space program, for example. But still, all was very good, and the economy grew, and the IT sector boosted. And then we woke up to 24th of February. I also woke up in Kyiv, and we found ourselves in different reality. But surprising or not, actually, IT continues to boost the economy as much as possible also during the war. So despite of war, the IT sector has grown for 28% annually as compared to previous year, and it has increased its income or its revenue from 6.5 billion to 7 billion. So despite of everything, it's absolutely, you know, it's almost magical when you see the IT specialists which are working between the basement and flat and basement and flat, and the systems are up like 90% plus, and as people are efficient, the economy is growing, and I think by today it's actually the biggest economy driving sector is IT. And it's critically important also for government, and they very much, let's say, take care of the IT specialists by different conditions, also by special taxation regime. Let's say, for example, for IT specialists in Ukraine, there is a 5% tax only, which means that out of all of your salary, you pay 5% tax because government is saying private entrepreneurs, IT technology, it's important for us. So besides IT and IT specialists, Ukraine has approximately 12 unicorns, depend how you count, which means there were $1 billion companies. And you might know Grammarly or GitLab or basically they have moved out from Ukraine, of course, under these conditions. Many of them are headquartered in US, in UK, but still they have research and development centers in Ukraine, as do like Google and Amazon and many big companies. And IT sector is also boosting thanks to incoming investments, too little, too early stage, but still we can see that more and more investors are interested in Ukraine. And in this year's Central Eastern Europe outlook, Ukraine and Croatia and Lithuania were the countries that had had the biggest enterprise growth in startups, which means the startups added value the most. Then I'm very proud that we managed to create at least some basis of e-Ukraine, or digital government, which was surprisingly very important also during war. And it is becoming more and more critical during war because you can still offer services, public services. You can keep the government institutions up and running when you have certain e-solution. And Ukraine has a smartphone-based solution, which was actually very wise, and we could experience it also during the war, that if you can get your e-services from your smartphone, if you can show your documents, even passports out of smartphone, you can travel more easily. You don't need to have this computer and wire and ID card, and it has really enabled Ukraine to also deliver services during the war. And for example, out of 15 million, I think approximately 10 million people have their passports in smartphone application, and Ukraine is the first in the world country where you can show your passport in mobile phone. And as well, Ukraine became, not only from the beginning of the war, but almost since 2021, the most attacked country in the world after the US, which means the cyber warfare, the information warfare, and it's extreme challenge also to keep the systems up and running. And thank you here still to Elon Musk and to Starlinks. You have been probably hearing a lot about this. Elon Musk turned it on, turn it off, Starlinks don't work, but actually Starlink is an extremely important part of the critical infrastructure in Ukraine, which means it in basically the second day of the war, Minister of Infrastructure in Ukraine, Minister of Digital Transformation, there are two of them, asked for Elon Musk to provide Starlink connections. And 2 days later, Musk replied that, okay, connections turned on. Of course, it was a month's work before that, but still, from the very first moment, it became critically important to government to have the services running, to army to have a secure connection, to even president and many government officials are giving their speeches using the Starlink satellites. So it's hugely vital, and Ukraine has become now also the second most Starlinked country in the world besides the US. So what is happening next, let's say? Government will be spending almost all of its budget to army, to military, to defense. Approximately 90% of budget will be spent on defense. Imagine that. And the rest of 10% on the social insurances, on pensions, on salaries of doctors, teachers, and so on. So there will be huge deficit. But Ukraine is also calling for different IT companies, for private investors, to look at Ukraine now, because it's also a great potential to help now and to be present in better times. And, it's very, let's say, hard to say, but still, these times are very good times for testing technology, testing new technology, using the Ukraine as, let's say, a little bit sandbox or test ground, because you can implement it very fast, you can try out the new technologies, everything is needed, absolutely full support from the government, and it's a very good time to try everything new. This is example of Ukrainian e-passport. And this is an example of Ukrainian e-procurement system. For example, also Ukraine managed not only to transform many services to e-services, but also to launch now one basically of the best in the world, really. I'm proud to say UNDP has said that, it wasn't me, e-procurement systems, which is extremely important because the government procurements goes through e-procurements, which means all the money that comes to Ukraine, all the money that is procured, it goes through open systems. And it's definitely one of the ways to fight corruption is to create this transparency. And we have many wartime solutions, which are also let's say, helping in challenging times. Here you can see the Starlink kits. Also, there are different, very strange applications that you wouldn't want to have in the peace times, but that are so needed in war times. For example, you can see here alarm or 8 system, and I think every Ukrainian has in their mobile phone this alarm system, which gives you information that you should go to shelter. Here is, for example, a very interesting application that I noticed an enemy, which is basically AI-based even, and recognizes the pictures and even the faces, and runs a face comparison in regards to here are the enemy tanks or our tanks or enemy faces or who are the enemies, or even face recognition to several criminal elements, let's say. But now coming to how technology can really help Ukraine to rebuild Ukraine. So first of all, I mentioned Starlinks. It's extremely important to have the connection up and running, and fast connection up and running in the liberated territories, which means basically that people can start living, working, connecting, and the Starlink again has been so far the fastest way to create the connection in the territories which have been liberated. So it's important, and one of the priorities of Ukraine is also to cover Ukraine with a fast internet connection to every village, every city by 2025, and it's still a priority, meaning that the lifeline is basically having this connection. Then it's important to basically evaluate and rebuild everything, which means now, for example, there is a program that in your smartphone you can show the destruction made to a house or home and register it in the government database, and you can then apply for your new, I don't know, apartment, new house too, and government has a control over at least some part of the damage made, basically. It's all the roads that should be inspected by drones. It's like basically, it's not only military technology, it's also like peacetime technology which is needed. It's, of course, the government efficiency. Estonia, when Estonia implemented digital signature, Estonia saved 2% of the GDP, which means it's a huge amount of efficiency increased, bureaucracy decreased, because of not people running around, but the papers basically, or the documents, let's say, not even papers. Then it's very important to attract, of course, investments, and especially IT and technology investments, because again, mining, good, nice, important, but technology creates jobs and creates many more jobs per dollar invested than, unfortunately or luckily, the new mines. And of course, 3Ds, basically the reform of justice system, and it could be only done by e-solutions, which means we already have very cool solutions about the court in your hand, basically the transparency of the courts, the transparency of courts' decisions, basically always the fight with corruption. It could be done only by using the e-technology, e-government, transparency, control, and it is definitely a priority, especially when the also reconstruction money will start coming to Ukraine to have this control. And I'm very sure that Ukraine is also like voting for increasing the control and transparency by implementing different e-solutions. And again, this is a sandbox, playground, test ground for all the new technologies, including Estonian technologies. And of course, debureaucratization, which means the less bureaucracy, the better, the more freedom, the better, the less legislation, the better, the more liberty for economy, the better, basically. So technology is extremely important during the war to be this lifeline to services, the government functioning, but it's also extremely important and even more important to after-war period for reconstruction, control, and efficiency. Thank you.